Forget everything you were told about the history of astronomy. Forget the neat timeline that jumps from the Greeks to the Renaissance to modern space telescopes. Because while Europe was still emerging from the Middle Ages, entire civilizations across the Americas were already mapping the sky with astonishing precision. And history barely whispers their names. We're talking about astronomers who predicted eclipses without metal instruments, who aligned cities to solstices with architectural precision, who tracked planetary cycles so accurately that modern researchers are still stunned. From the high-altitude observatories of the Inca to the sky-centered ceremonial culture of the Zuni, the cosmos wasn't mythology. It was mathematics. It was survival. It was science. Here's the myth. Ancient indigenous cultures studied the stars symbolically or spiritually. Here's the reality. They engineered calendars more accurate than early European systems. They built solar observatories aligned to fractions of a degree. They recorded planetary cycles across generations, and they did it without telescopes, without written equations, without the credit. At 12,000 feet above sea level, Inca astronomer priests studied the Milky Way not just as scattered stars, but as dark constellations formed by cosmic dust clouds. They mapped negative space in the galaxy centuries before modern astrophysics understood what those shadows actually were. Pause and think about that. They weren't just looking at the stars, they were identifying structures inside the galaxy. Now ask yourself, why wasn't that in your science textbook? In what is now the American Southwest, the Zuni and other Puebloan cultures constructed stone markers and horizon calendars that tracked the sun's movement with jaw-dropping accuracy. At sites like Chaco Canyon, massive structures align with lunar standstills, a complex 18.6-year cycle of the moon that even many modern skywatchers don't track. 18.6 years. That means generations of careful observation, recorded, remembered, verified. That's not superstition, that's longitudinal data collection. And eclipses. Contrary to popular belief, several indigenous cultures developed methods to anticipate solar and lunar eclipses through cyclical tracking of celestial bodies. No digital models, no observatories funded by empires, just systematic sky observation over decades, sometimes centuries. When an eclipse darkened the sky, it wasn't random, it was expected. Imagine the intellectual discipline required to make that possible. So why don't we talk about this? Well, it's because the dominant narrative of science history was written through a colonial lens. Achievements that didn't fit the European scientific framework were labeled as mythology. Architectural observatories were called ceremonial sites. Astronomical records encoded in oral tradition were dismissed as folklore. But, precision doesn't just disappear because it's spoken instead of written. Data is still data. When we zoom out, the global story of astronomy really changes. Yes, Nicholas Copernicus revolutionized heliocentrism. Yes, Galileo Galilei improved telescopic observation. But, centuries before European telescopes, civilizations across the Americas were integrating astronomical cycles into agriculture, architecture, governance, and ceremony with extraordinary precision. They didn't separate science from life. The sky governed planting seasons. Political rituals aligned with solstices. Cities were built as cosmic calendars. This wasn't fringe knowledge, it was civilizational infrastructure. In this video, we're breaking down the Inca system of horizon pillars used to mark solar movement, the Zuni sky traditions that encoded planetary cycles, how eclipse prediction actually worked without modern instruments, and the archaeological evidence that's forcing historians to rewrite scientific timelines. Some of these discoveries are so precise, they challenge assumptions about how knowledge evolves. What if the history of science isn't a straight line from Greece to Europe to NASA? What if it's a web with brilliant nodes deliberately forgotten? And what if some of the most advanced sky mapping in the ancient world happened in places history told you were primitive? Stay with me, yeah? Because once you see the evidence, you won't just rethink indigenous astronomy, you'll rethink the entire story of global scientific advancement.